Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to SSP Diving. Before we get into our investigation, let me explain a little bit about my background. So, I am a commercial diver. I've worked the past 14 years in the commercial diving industry and the maritime industry. Back in 2018, OceanGate actually reached out to my company directly. They wanted us to essentially provide emergency response dive support for the dives that they were doing in the Puget Sound at the time. From what I recall, at that time, they were doing research with the six-gill sharks in the Puget Sound. So I remember even back then, they were taking stars like Macklemore out into a submersible. I believe that was the submersible Antipodes at the time. Him and Stockton Rush were down in a submersible a couple hundred feet below the surface in the Puget Sound. So I really have a unique perspective on what happened here, and it really does hit close to home, not only because they're from the same city as me, but they also reached out to us directly, and we've had contact and communication with them. My personal connection with OceanGate gives me a unique perspective on this Titan tragedy. Now, this isn't going to be a video about complex engineering details. It's about sharing my experience and shedding light on the events from the perspective of someone who knows the risks and realities of deep sea operations. As commercial divers, one of the many things that we do is called NDT, non-destructive testing, and that could be anything from ultrasonic thickness testing to visual testing to underwater X-ray inspection on a transducer for the Navy. So there are many tasks that commercial divers do, and we are very familiar with the marine conditions, how different materials react. We often have to put on our investigator hat and try to figure out what went wrong and provide that information in a report to the Navy, Coast Guard, police departments, you name it. Now, as divers, another thing that we are extremely familiar with is the pressure and how it reacts, especially us in the cold water where we're diving dry suits. So our dry suits, we actually have to inflate air into our suits to keep the water out. If we don't inflate air and we just continue to dive deeper, the suit will end up sort of crushing us. Now, speaking of the physics and pressure, that's actually where I want to start off. So I graduated from the Divers Institute of Technology, and before we do any diving, the first thing that we do is learn about physics and pressure. So that's exactly where I want to start you guys off so I can get you in the right mindset and we could think about things from a diver's perspective. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go over is Boyle's Law. So this is one of the first things that they teach us. And Boyle's Law essentially says that the gas inside of something is going to equalize to the ambient pressure around it. So here we have a balloon that's full. This is 100% full. The depth we are at is 0 meters in 0 feet. And we are at 1 atmosphere of pressure. So this might get a little confusing, but just stick with me because it's all going to make sense here as we dive deeper. No pun intended. So at 1 atmosphere of pressure, that is at sea level plus all of the pressure of the Earth's atmosphere on top of you. So that is 1 atmosphere. Now, for every 10 meters or about 33 feet, you add another atmosphere. So when you go to 10 feet below sea level or 33 feet deep, it's going to be not 1 atmosphere, but it's going to be 2. So you have 1 atmosphere of depth plus the atmosphere of the surface on top of you. So that continues to compound every 10 meters. Now, as you can see here at the surface, you have a balloon that's filled at 100%. You dive down 1 atmosphere, it's going to be half that size. You dive down 3 atmospheres or 66 feet, it's going to be a third that size. And at 4 atmospheres, it's going to be about a quarter of that size. Now, over here, if you are using metric, we have bar. We also have pounds per square inch. And this chart over here just helps illustrate the amount of pressure that is on your lungs at that depth. So 4 atmospheres, you're going to have about 4 times the amount of pressure. Now, the Titanic shipwreck was at about 12,500 feet, which is about 6,000 psi or 400 atmospheres. So you can imagine that balloon, essentially that balloon is going to get crushed. Even the material itself, not only is all the air going to get squeezed out of it, but the material itself is going to be compressed. At that depth, the human body can't fight off that pressure. So even if you went down there with, say, like scuba gear, so even if you were actually physically diving down to that depth, your skin and everything is just going to be totally compressed. You can't handle that pressure. It's sort of like being, if you stuck your hand under a hydraulic press, it's just going to compress everything. That's how much force is behind that amount of water. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at, they show us this in dive school to help illustrate Boyle's law. And what they're going to show, okay, so what's going on in this demonstration is they have this traditional diver's suit here. So this is a traditional old school diver helmet, diver suit setup. A lot of people don't know this, but these old school setups, these old school suits, they are actually mated to the helmet. So this whole suit is filled with air. And how these work is you have air coming down from a compressor on the dive boat, and air is constantly being pushed through. So it's like you can hear the air being pushed into the helmet. It's actually very loud. And you have an exhaust valve right here on your helmet, and that's how you adjust how much air is free flowing out of your helmet. And essentially what they're going to do is simulate if the hose was cut topside. Inside of this suit, it's going to instantly equalize to the surrounding pressure around it. Now, to simulate the effects that it would have on a human body, they're going to have a pig inside of here, a dead pig. This is just for demonstration purposes, of course. They can't have a human inside of here, but they're going to have a pig inside of here, and they're going to simulate cutting the hose. So they're going to open a valve which releases all the air out of here, and you'll see what happens with that pressure. So this is Boyle's law here in a nutshell.
This deep sea diver is down 300 feet. He loses the pressure in his suit.
He loses pressure in his suit.
Squeezed and sucked up,
and he gets squeezed.
Making sure that the air pressure inside the suit is equal to the water pressure surrounding it.
So did you guys catch that? The pressure inside of the suit is equal to the surrounding pressure around it, or the ambient pressure. So he's at 300 feet deep. Well, that pressure inside of the suit is going to be 300 feet deep of pressure, which equates to 135 psi roughly.
Okay, that's 300 feet.
Okay, so now that they're at the 300-foot depth, they're going to essentially cut the line. So they're going to open this dump valve, and all the pressure inside of here is going to get equalized to the pressure around it at 300 feet. So let's see what happens. Now, a couple of things here. So as you can see, this is a simulation, so it's not instantaneous yet. The air is slowly being released. The air also has to fight its way back up to the surface now. So that's why it's not as instantaneous as it would be in a real life situation, or with the situation of the OceanGate Titan. But so here you can see essentially the pig head right here. It's just starting to make its way up into the helmet, and let's just watch what happens here. Remember what I said earlier about the human flesh and what it does at pressure. Watch that helmet. Watch the helmet. Especially from this view right here. Look at that, the helmet's crushing inward.
And the drastic pressure differential pushed Meat Man into his helmet.
So that's Boyle's law. Now, if you look in the background here, you can see how the suit actually squeezed on you. So that's why I was mentioning earlier with the dry suits, we actually have an inflator to help prevent the suit from squeezing on us, which is commonly called suit squeeze. So that there was a crash course in physics, and you can imagine, so if they were at roughly the depth here of the height of the Statue of Liberty, so they were only at 135 psi. The Titan shipwreck is going to be around 6,000 psi. They were only at 9 atmospheres of pressure, and the Titan shipwreck is at 400 atmospheres. 300 feet versus 12,500 feet. So that is a major difference. Now, did they have warning signs? A lot of people are saying that no, they didn't have any warning signs. They wouldn't have made any noise. It would have just snapped and disintegrated. That's what we were told leading up to this. Now, during this week of investigations and hearings, the NTSB released reports And we also heard some witness testimony that pretty much confirms, no, they did have warning signs. Unfortunately, the passengers inside of there were probably unaware of how severe this was. So, okay, so they did have warning signs, and we'll go over that here shortly, but let's go over this report from the NTSB. They actually released 2 material reports. So we're all pretty familiar with the construction of the OceanGate Titan by now, I'm sure. So this was actually in the factory when the hull was being manufactured. So how they did this, this is actually once the hull is completed. They had this stainless tube inside of the hull and then wrapped the hull with carbon fiber. And once it was done being wrapped, they removed the hull. Now, what I didn't know is they did this in 5 separate layers. So they did this in 5 1-inch layers, and you can actually see that here. Okay, so here's a look at the hull. So if you were to cut the edge of the hull off, which they actually did once they completed the manufacturing, and kept those ends, which we'll see here shortly, you can actually see the adhesive layers between each of the 1-inch wraps of carbon fiber. So essentially the process was they would take the carbon fiber, they wrapped it around that steel tube until it was 1 inch thick, and then they applied adhesive, and then they would wrap the next 1 inch, and then they would keep doing that until they had 5 layers of 1 inch thick material. Now, I'll show you guys something very alarming. Okay, so this right here is actually showing them applying that adhesive to a layer of carbon fiber. And this is actually them stringing the carbon fiber on. Now, this whole time, I always thought that they did a hex pattern. So they were doing a crossing pattern with the carbon fiber wraps, but no, they did it in a straight linear pattern, which to me screams a weaker design. Now, you can also imagine that if there was any bit of dust or anything that was not uniform here, as they're wrapping these layers on in a linear fashion, any wrinkle is going to get increased with each layer. And I'll show you guys that here in a second. See how they're wrapping this in a linear design? Okay, so now this is the titanium ring. So there were 2 titanium rings, one at each end of the submersible, and I am still in shock to hear this. They were only glued on. I thought that they were bolted or secured in some other fashion.
It's the glue holding the family together, and we want to make sure it's right.
That to me is insane.
It's pretty simple, but if we mess it up, there's not a lot of recovery.
So here they're applying all of the glue. So if we look here, we can see inside actually of this C channel. Now remember this because this is going to be very important. So each ring is attached the same way. So this C channel has a lip on the inside and the outside, and it's not much of a lip, which common sense tells me that it should be much longer than this. There's not much of an edge there to allow the adhesive to hold on to that carbon fiber. Okay, so now they're going to drop this ring on. So the glue, so the epoxy is on there, and they just drop the ring on. And essentially that's the way that it holds. So let me just pause. Knowing that, it is amazing that this thing held together for as long as it did. This just screams, it just screams incompetence, negligence, in my opinion. Now, in addition to that, they have titanium domes here on the end. Now, I believe the forward dome, this is the one that has that large acrylic viewport here. This one has a hinge, I believe, to allow this to swing open and closed. The one in the rear is just bolted on directly to that titanium ring. But both ends have titanium rings epoxied on, and then the domes bolt shut. And we actually heard this week testimony discussing this forward dome right here. It was teeter-tottering when they were trying to bring it back on board, And for some reason, there's supposed to be 18 bolts to hold this together. For some reason, they actually dove with only 4 of the bolts installed. So this titanium dome, believe it or not, these things are 3,500 pounds. So when the submersible slammed forward and landed forward, it actually sheared all 4 bolts with passengers inside, which is absolutely insane to me that they continued to keep diving this. I mean, the amount of negligence involved is just astounding. Okay, so here we're looking at the ROV. They're getting ready to recover one of the titanium end caps or domes, and they actually have the rigging hooked up already. You can see how the quality of this ROV, this is really what the quality of anything going to this depth should be. You know, to be quite frank, the Titan looks pretty recreational compared to this ROV, which is built to go to this depth and beyond. So we see here that they got their rigging put up, rigged up here. They're getting ready to pull this end cap up, and you can see that the rigging points, what they have are essentially they're sort of like C clamps that they use, since there's not really any good rigging points here, and they need something simple for the ROV to latch onto and rig to. They just use these clamps that essentially just clamp onto the side of the dome, and these arms can get a lot of torque and torque those down pretty tight. So now, for the longest time, we were actually told that the entire hull disintegrated, right? But that's not what happened. There's actually a lot of hull left down here, and we'll take a look here. So there's actually quite a bit of hull that is left down here. So here's one of the domes. I believe this is the side with the acrylic viewport. And here we can actually see the majority. We can actually see a lot of this hull right here is still intact. So what is this? Maybe close to a quarter of the hull, not intact, but we were told that the thing completely disintegrated into small pieces like this, which makes sense, but it's not completely what happened. Now here you can see the titanium ring, and we'll get a closer look at that in a little bit once they salvaged it, and we have some closer photos. And then there you can see another end cap. Now, I believe this is the aft end, so this is not the side with the acrylic viewport in it. But you could just imagine what an eerie feeling this must have been to come upon this when they were doing their first original location and recovery for this. And I've had to do some recoveries in the past, and you know, it's not a good feeling when you it's kind of a scary feeling when you come across things like this. It's certainly an eerie feeling, especially in deep dark water like this. Now this right here is one of the side rails. It's pretty much it's one of the side rails. We'll go over everything here shortly, but I just want to give you guys an idea of how much debris there is. So when we're putting our investigator hat on, let's also go back and think about that MYTHBUSTERS video and how everything got sucked into that diver helmet. So all that material from that pig inside of the suit all got sucked into the helmet. Well, look at how much material is here just in one end of this submersible. So a lot of things just got sucked into one end, and it's possible that it could have got sucked into the other end as well and got pushed out towards the ends where these titanium domes aren't going to fail. But yeah, this is one that collected a lot of the debris, which is it's actually amazing that still held together. But you can obviously tell that these titanium rings, now these rings here, they did compress. They are compressed at this depth, but not as much as carbon fiber would compress, obviously. So looking into the NTSB report, so we can tell that yes, okay, so yes, we were correct. This is the aft dome. So this is not the side with the acrylic viewport. This over here is the forward dome, with the acrylic viewport in it. And then, yes, obviously we could see the composite hull, the aft segment there, that ring, and then this is just showing the direction of the hull there. And then also, so this is saying right here that this part right here is the bottom, 6 o'clock. So if we're looking at it, this is going to be 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So the bottom would be 6 o'clock, right? So just keep that in mind. This thing is, we're sort of looking at the bottom of it here. Now here, if we're looking at this titanium ring, which is still attached to the dome, you can actually see, it's hard to tell, but you can actually see, remember those small edges that I was telling you guys about that were on the sides? Well, those actually sheared off. And then so this is the forward dome, like we mentioned. There's debris inside of there and sand that, you know, just simply from this thing landing, it's going to have a cloud of silt that lands inside of it. Now this is the okay, so this is the titanium ring. So the titanium ring separated from the dome here. And you can actually see, remember those rings that I was telling you guys about on the side, those flanges, where the flanges that got set onto the carbon fiber hull? Well, that's what these are right here. They actually sheared off all this right here. That's what those are. And you know, I don't know what's going on here, but that appears to be rust. So I'm not sure why there's a bolt that's down there that has rust on it. That's a little bit concerning. I'm not sure what material was used there. But anyways, moving on. So they also saw the tail cone down there. So let's take a look here. So they're saying that there was a pre-existing separation. So before it went down. Okay, so now this is them with the ROV. They're showing up. So now this is with the ROV. They're now discovering the tail cone during that original search. And the tail cone is actually pretty much completely intact. Now, why is it completely intact? Well, it wasn't inside of that hull. Anything inside of that pressurized vessel was going to be damaged from the implosion. Essentially, this is on the outside. This is only attached to the hull essentially by a frame. So none of this here was affected by the implosion because it wasn't actually inside of the hull, right? Okay, so the Coast Guard is saying that there was a pre-existing separation. And actually when this thing went down, there was actually a ratchet strap securing it. So essentially what the white is right here is it's a pretty much protective layer for all of the instruments and cords and cables inside of this cage, inside of the frame. And it also helps act as a fairing material. So not only does it protect everything, but it helps streamline everything so it's nice and smooth. Now again, so this is the remains of the hull and the aft dome. This is a hull piece A, hull piece B that they're calling it. This is the bottom right here. So so this is going to be kind of towards the top over here on this side. So this is a better look at it here. So what we have is the starboard rail, the port rail. Those are rails that are actually on the outside of the hull. Those are actually rails on the outside of the hull, and you can see they just bent and twisted these like it was nothing. I mean, this is actually pretty high grade titanium, and they were just able to just bend those like nothing. So yeah, you could just imagine how much force was behind this to not only bend and twist this thick metal, but to actually then shove it inside of the hull like this and suck everything down like that. It's pretty immense amount of pressure. This is a very clear HD video. I mean, I'm surprised that we're getting this clear footage, but down at that depth, there's not a lot of things living, not a lot of living organisms, so the visibility is going to be much, much better. And this right here, so you can see this piece of green with, you know, some red splatters is what it looks to be on it. Now, what I believe that is actually the oxygen cylinders. So inside of the hole, on top of all this, you know, they had pressurized cylinders in top of it, inside of there. So there was oxygen cylinders inside of the hole, which is also pretty insane to think about, because those themselves are somewhat explosives, you know. So there's a lot of pressure inside of those, maybe 2 to 3,000 psi of pressure inside of these oxygen tanks. And so you could just see how it just twisted and warped that metal like it was nothing. And there's a little piece of it right there as well. There's another look there. And I think actually at some point they have it labeled. Now, it's incredible to me. This is the next big thing I want to point out here. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, so there's different types of non-destructive methods that you can do to inspect things like this hole. You can do X-ray, you can do visual. Well, you could do an X-ray inspection, you could do a visual inspection. Well, what happened was you can't do a visual inspection anymore because they covered the outside of the hole with rhino liner. And Stockton Rush actually seemed very proud that he came up with that idea, which is just absolutely astounding to me. One, you cannot do a visual inspection, and two, you're adding another layer of coating on top of the carbon fiber, which is going to compress at a different rate than the carbon fiber itself. And the material of the rhino liner is different than the carbon fiber, so it's going to eventually separate. And I'm sure that's what happened, and it probably helped increase delamination rates. So yeah, it's just very unfortunate here. You can see this delamination, the separation of all the different plies there. And here you can see again the gas cylinder. These are steel gas cylinders. So for it to just warp this and bend it like it was nothing, that just takes an immense amount of pressure. That's a ton of impact there. So some of these pieces here, so like whole piece A, B, layers 2, 3, layers 4, 5. So they brought these pieces up, and these are actually being discussed in the NTSB report. Yep, so here's just more photos. They just wanted to get as many different photos of this as possible, just to show the layers, the pieces there. So here you can actually see this is a separation of layers right here. So remember that green adhesive that was holding the 1-inch thick layers together? Well, that's what this green is right here. And you can actually see how they just peeled apart. And all those strands of carbon fiber, you can actually see it right there, how it just peeled off there. Now here you can see the end of the titanium ring, and you can actually see sections here that are missing that glue adhesive or epoxy. And so they have closer photos of that here shortly. And here's a section of the hole. Was actually, look at this, it has multiple bends in it. So this, I believe, indicates a sudden collapse of the hole. So something, it definitely caused a collapse. They have the inward bend, outward bend marked. Another section here showing one of the layers bending. So now this is dive number 80. So this was before the dive down, before the big boom happened. So these are the acoustic devices. They are taking measurements inside of the hull and listening for any abnormal sounds or deficiencies or changes over time. So now we can see the difference between dive number 75, which is in dark blue, and then dive number 80, which is in light blue. They're, for the most part, they're pretty parallel. They're on the same trajectory there. Now, dive number 81 is when we started seeing some changes in the soundings. which should have caused a red flag, and this should have been an all stop right here. This vessel should have been all stopped, and they shouldn't have proceeded without doing a further investigation and figured out why this was going on. But as we continue going on here, you can see that this actually gets to be more and more severe. So not only did they not do an all stop, figure out what was going on, they actually continued, and the problem ended up getting worse and worse, as you can see here. Now, us as divers, we know that the biggest change is going to be in that first 100 feet. You're going from atmospheric pressure, then you're instantly going to a few atmospheres underwater. So you can see here at 100 meters, that's where that biggest change is going to be. And any diver or anyone in the maritime industry, especially in a submersible industry like this, they know that this is complete negligence, in my opinion. Now you can see here that these soundings over time, over those last few dives, this is leading up to the dive. So when I say that they had warnings and the signs were there, well, this is what I mean. The signs were there. You can hear these on the dives. And according to one of the witnesses this week, they pretty much said that Stockton was just kind of ignoring it and saying that, well, brace yourself, you're going to hear some big bangs. And that's exactly what they were hearing. And those bangs were increasing with each dive leading up to this tragedy. And here's just a look at the LARS. So this is the launch and recovery system that they used. Essentially, it was a barge that was being towed behind. And it's pretty amazing that they were actually towing this thing behind the vessel in rough weather, because we all know that the weather when these tragedies were happening, because I don't know if you guys know, but the weather when they were trying to do this last mission, the weather was actually pretty rough. So this thing was actually bouncing up and down, getting bounced around. And here's just some photos of some of the difficulties that they were having with the LARS. It looks like this thing kind of tipped back, and I believe that there was passengers inside of here. This definitely happened at least once when there was passengers inside. That's what one of the witnesses was saying earlier this week. And here it says that the tail cone actually separated as a result of this mishap. Here's a look at them towing the LARS with the ROV, or with the submersible on it. And it's actually tipping forward. Now here is readings from another acoustic listening device. Now they're saying that from dive 75 to dive 83, these gauge outputs actually drifted higher. So essentially these noises got louder and louder with each dive leading up to this tragedy. And here we'll just take a quick look at these materials. This is from the NTSB report. So these are coupons here that they had cut from those samples. So this is, I believe this is sample B. They actually cut out, did a field cut here, and cut out sections and took photographs of the separation of this layer. Now this is just one layer. Remember how they had the green adhesive there. Now here's where things start to get concerning. So this is one of the layers, and between the layers they have multiple numbers of plies. So this right here is just 1 inch. This is just one layer. You can see some of the waviness here, and you can also see a difference in thickness of the adhesive. And here they also are mentioning the thin adhesive right here, which is going to reduce reduce the amount of glue right between the two layers. Now here, this is a coupon that was cut out, and this is showing the adhesive between multiple layers. Now, some very concerning things here is you can actually see some gaps between the adhesive, and this right here, I think what they're saying are these spots right here is actually the carbon fiber peeling up and separating, because see how those are kind of a uniform dimensions there. Okay, so here's another look at some of the layers, and you can actually see some of the waviness here. Now that's not too concerning. Let's continue on here at some of the other concerns. So this is between the plies. You can see the porosity. So porosity, what they're saying is this is air that is trapped between these layers and in the adhesive, which is extremely concerning when this is being pressurized to 6,000 psi, and it's being pressurized, so it's compressing and then it's decompressing. It's going through many compression cycles, so that's extremely concerning, right? Now here's another photo of one of the separated layers. You can see all of this porosity that's inside of there. So these are all air gaps. Now these are glossy regions. There's a void, so there's an obvious void right there where there wasn't any good adhesive, right? That's all going to be air that's in there. Now these are fractures. There's delamination. It sounded like there was pre-existing delamination. Now when they were constructing this, they, as I mentioned earlier, they cut off the ends of the carbon fiber tube, so they had a nice smooth hole for something to glue to. And here you can actually see that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers right here. So as they were wrapping the layers, they moved inward closer with each layer. And then they cut it off. Now they actually saved these, and I'm glad that they did, because this is sort of a smoking gun, and you can see what happened and what went wrong. And you know, I'm not an expert or an engineer in the process of manufacturing with carbon fiber, right? But there's some very common sense things that we could point out. So here there's an obvious void in the adhesive. Here there's a very obvious wrinkling. And what they did was, when they would reach that layer, so this is the end of a 1-inch layer, and there was a bump. So when they finished that, there was a bump right here. What they did was grind everything down. So you can see that they mentioned right here that they grinded down the tops of those, which essentially would separate that ply, and it would reduce the strength of that ply, and then they would just throw some adhesive on top of it, start the next layer, which is extremely concerning to me. Now the problem didn't start right here. The problem actually started way down here and then increased gradually. So here you can get a much better idea of what we've been talking about here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers, all 1-inch thick layers with that adhesive between, and then each one of these is going to have plies in between it, right? It's made up of lots of plies there. Now here you can see these are extremely concerning to me. So it started off pretty smooth, but of course, as you continue to pile up those small layers of carbon fiber, well, you can see what happens here. Look at these major wrinkles. I mean, this one almost comes inward and then comes back out, and they ended up just cutting that off and then restarting with the fresh layers, cutting it off, grinding it down, making sure it's all nice and smooth, and then starting again. But what they're doing is actually cutting the strands, so it's an incomplete strand and an incomplete ply. Here's a better look at those. Yeah, so extremely concerning stuff. So my heart really goes out to everyone here involved in this tragedy, the victims, and especially their families. They didn't deserve to go out this way, and you know, a lot of this could have been prevented. Would have it slowed down progress? Yes, maybe, but you know, these things can be done safely. James Cameron has proved that on numerous times. He went to about twice this depth on a solo mission. So these things can be done safely, but there are rules and processes involved to make sure that that happens. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and kind of it helped illustrate from a diver's perspective what's going on, why there was an implosion, and kind of helps illustrate how much pressure there actually is involved down here, because it's sort of hard to imagine when you're not faced with that on a daily basis, or to some people never in life are never faced with this with these sort of pressures. So I hope that gave you a unique perspective from a commercial diver and maritime professional's point of view. Thank you guys for watching, and take care.